Welcome into our Wednesday night Bible study. My name is Bill Watt and George Brewer, the Right Reverend George Brewer with the Woodland Trace Church here in Jasper, Alabama. And tonight we're going to begin a new series looking at some familiar Bible stories and try to give you maybe a new twist on them, maybe a little new perspective, a fresh perspective on some Bible stories that are familiar to us all. And tonight we're going to start with maybe the most familiar of those Bible stories, and that is the story of David and Goliath, which we find we're going to focus on tonight in 1 Samuel chapter 17. Right, George?
That's right. And we're not going to show you the scripture tonight on the screen, but we encourage everyone to grab a Bible and to open to 1 Samuel chapter 17 and lay a little bit of the setting here. We're looking back at 3,000 years to the valley of Elah, where you have a standoff between two armies, the Israelites and the Philistines, one on one hill and the other on the other hill. And in between, you have this massive giant of a man named Goliath and of Gath, and he's taunting the armies of Israel and God himself. Does it for 40 days. He comes out for 40 days, and for 40 days, all of the Israelites are shrinking back until who shows up?
Yeah, he comes out, and it's kind of reminiscent of kind of the way sports is. I mean, there's a lot of taunting here, a lot of trash talk, and you pick it up here with with the description of Goliath. You want me to read over that in verse 4? Just read the description here.
Yeah.
Where he says, a champion named Goliath, who is from Gath, as you pointed out, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. A lot of speculation as to exactly how big this guy was. He was a big guy.
How many cubits are you? Just out of curiosity.
How many cubits am I?
Yeah.
I have no clue how many cubits I am. How many cubits are you? You're considerably shorter than I am. What are you, about a cubit and a half? What about the width of a hand? Is that right? How big is a cubit?
No idea.
You have no idea?
No, I don't know.
You're supposed to know these things.
We're supposed to know this.
Some people have speculated, some people say 9 to 10 feet.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Which a basketball rim.
Maybe not that big, 6'9", whatever. But anyway, he was a big guy.
Big guy.
And he had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. Maybe 100 pounds or so of armor. And on his legs there were bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod. And its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. So big guy, just huge. This guy would have been impressive, terrifying to look at, obviously.
So if he was 9 foot 9 feet 9 inches tall, he's like a foot taller than the tallest human being recorded, which is like 5'3" or something, 8'3". And so not only is he tall, he's also a big guy. The armor you're describing here, some suspected that maybe he weighed 400, 500 pounds. So he's not tall and skinny. He's
right.
A nice guy.
Right. And they describe him as a champion. So this guy had, I'm sure he'd been through several battles, and was probably well known as being a great champion. But he comes out and taunts them. He basically makes fun of them, and says, basically, beginning in verse 8, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? Are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man, have him come down to me. If he's able to fight and kill me, we'll become your subjects. But if I overcome and kill him, you'll become our subjects and serve us." The Philistine said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man, let us fight each other." And on hearing this, all the Israelites were afraid, including King Saul.
Yeah.
Terrified.
It's kind of interesting here, kind of what he's asking. He's not asking for a conventional fight where my army fights your army. this is a little bit different here. Instead, he's asking one man to come out and represent the army of Israel and to fight him, which is, it's high stakes. But I guess the on the upside of that, a lot of men get to come home to their families, and they come home, occupied by another nation. But that's interesting. It's very interesting warfare here.
Yeah, it's reminiscent of the Greeks used to fight this way. There was kind of a wasn't that uncommon in the ancient world where you had, and it was, you'd live to fight another day. You'd lose maybe, but at least you'd have your life, and you'd live to fight another day, like I said. So this was not uncommon, and there's even some speculation that maybe these Philistines might have been from the Isle of Crete, which is right off the coast of Greece. So this is,
Makes sense.
reminiscent of the way they fought during this time period. So this was not uncommon.
So here's the picture here. You've got this giant named Goliath, and we all know the story. He's facing this young boy named David, and this is part of the twist that we want to put in this story is, we usually read this story in the sense that it's a story of courage where David is battling someone who is out of his class. But what you and I are going to point out is that maybe not so, that maybe David is as skilled, even more skilled in fighting than even Goliath himself. So, but a little bit of information on David. He was a son of Jesse, the great grandson of Ruth and Boaz. He was born in Bethlehem, the youngest of 8 sons. We remember when Samuel comes out there and anoints him king to succeed Saul. But it's like 18 years before he actually occupies the throne. Actually, no, he's 18 years old. It's 15 years before he actually occupies the throne. And so in this setting here, his father is sending him to run an errand to deliver groceries to his fighting brothers. When he hears the voice of Goliath, taunting Israel and Israel's God. And so look at verse 26 there. Read it for us if you don't mind, Bill.
Yeah, 26. David asked the men standing there. He hears this guy, the Goliath taunting them. And David says, what will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine? He gets that specific. This uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God. And so they respond to him what they had been saying and told him, this is what we've done. This is what we'll do for the man who actually kills him. And basically,
the verse before
told his brother, says, basically, Saul basically promises them that, look, I'll go ahead and I'll give you one of my daughters to marry. I'll give you riches beyond your wildest dreams, basically. And you have to pay taxes for the rest of your life. So this is one heck of a deal, that he's offering to kill this, Goliath, but nobody's taking him up on it.
Well, no one's taking him up on it, but there is a young man who is very confident.
Right.
And he sees it as something that's very doable and wants to take the challenge on. But it's kind of like a lot of us in life, whenever we see that we're able to answer the call that's before us, there's always going to be somebody that's going to push back and try to discourage us from doing the very thing that we know that God has equipped us to be able to do. And in this situation here, verses 28 and 29, you have one of David's brothers that is discouraging him, talking down to him, even using sarcasm. You have those verses there, 28 and 29.
I do. And it's so reminiscent of, we were talking earlier about this, that Jesus talks about this, a prophet's not accepted in his own country, and how, his brothers and mother, they hear these things that he's doing, think maybe he's lost his mind and show up and say, they come to see him and he says, who are my mothers? Who are my brothers? So Jesus faced the same thing. But in verse 28, when Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? Right? He's kind of, sarcastic here. He says, I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. So David says, it's not so like now. David says, well, now what have I done? Can I even speak? He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter. And the man answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. So quite a commotion here. Saul's, overhears this, and David comes over to him, and so David becomes, the focus here, and David basically offers to go kill him.
Anytime you're out, doing the work of God, or you feel called to do something, there's always someone that's going to throw a wet blanket on your dreams and passions for God, as Eliab is doing right here. And, kind of David's like, aren't there more important matters to discuss right now? You have someone who's actually taunting our God, and but it's usually the folks maybe who are closest to us that should be rooting us on, but instead they're talking us down. They don't have, his older brothers don't have the guts to do it, and they don't want him to try either. And so I find interesting is that David is being described here in this story with spiritual attributes, courage, conviction, confidence. Goliath, and you'll bear this point out here, I know in a moment, is that Goliath is being described by his physical attributes. We read, about how tall he is, how heavy he is, his armor, all these physical attributes. But there's some things that are going on here that if we just read it casually, we might miss. And you might want to make a point about Saul before we get into David and his sling. But do you want to say anything else about Saul as we make our way to David?
Well, Saul is kind of abdicating his responsibility here. Saul's not stepping up either as king, to fight Goliath. And it's interesting too that, like you kind of alluded to here, that David, of course, Saul is offering, riches and the marriage to his daughter, and not paying taxes to try to entice someone to go fight Goliath. But David doesn't focus on any of that. He's basically thinking about God and standing up for God, and who's going to fight this Philistine on behalf of God. And so David doesn't focus on the riches at all. David's going to fight for the right reason.
Yeah, I think part of David's confidence comes in the fact that he's placing his trust in God. Like the point you're making there, all the Israelites see is Goliath, and Goliath being bigger than God. And they have lost their faith, like you're describing there. Saul, the leader of Israel, had lost his faith. And you go back a couple of chapters in this book, you read of a story where he was not against the Amalekites. He was supposed to have destroyed everything, and he kept some things. And Samuel calls him on it, and he wasn't being obedient to God. And so he's starting to fumble, in his faith. And so, but David, on the other hand, sees God as bigger than Goliath, and he knew that God could knock him out with a pebble, just brush him off the earth. And so,
sometimes we see something that is, someone, like in this case, someone who is, terrifying and big, but maybe you get to looking that much closer, and they're not as strong as they seem to be. They're not what they seem to be.
So let's talk about this guy, that's a giant. You and I listened to a podcast about giants, about people that are, incredibly tall.
Yes, a guy named Malcolm Gladwell. He's written a book about this, based on this story about this really isn't a story about an underdog, but he talks about how Goliath is described and how we may suffer from giantism, where the fact that actually scientists have talked about the fact that a lot of these people suffer from tumors on the pituitary gland, and it affects their vision, which David has described. He comes to him and Goliath talks about the fact that you come at me with sticks, plural, wasn't that David only has one stick. And also he's being led out there. So maybe, we're talking about someone who's rather clumsy, who's maybe also can't see that well. And so there's some what seem to be advantages may not be advantages. So anyway, so David, Saul tries to fit him with his armor. David, puts it on. He can't really move well in it. He says, I don't really need this. I can't fight with this. Yeah, and he chooses to fight with what he knows well. And, we have this impression that David was this kid who, he'd been with sheep, but protecting those sheep involved a lot. So David was quite a man.
Yeah. We did a little bit of research on, the slingshots that David, the type of slingshot that David had, not the kind of slingshot that I grew up with and as a boy, that my grandfather.
Did you have a slingshot in Texas?
Yeah.
Were you well known in your community for using that slingshot?
Did not make those in Alabama. From a tree that kind of looks like this right here with a rubber band. Yeah, I couldn't hit anything with that. But this slingshot was actually a weapon that you could fire across and knock a bird out of the air. You can get some of those. And so
deadly accurate. Accurate.
You look at the story and you look at Goliath being a giant and David being this very skilled, not an archer, but he could sling a slingshot.
But the way they would use these slingshots is that I've been described by people as they're like really like you use these stones as like guided missiles, and speculate that you could hit something at 200 yards, and it'd be like using a 45 caliber pistol. Yeah. It's we're talking about deadly. These are lethal weapons.
Yeah, and the closer that David is getting to Goliath, the more lethal he's becoming with his slingshot. And so that's kind of as we read here, you're going to get the picture that David is moving closer and closer to Goliath. Goliath is saying, "Hey, why don't you come to me?" Because he would love nothing more than to get into a sword fight, with David. And while David is moving closer, he knows exactly what he's doing.
Right. And actually, also to even get more detailed, which this podcast that we were talking about earlier, Malcolm Gladwell, he's talking about the fact that a lot of these stones that David picks up, fine smooth stones, but they're not just any stones. These stones are denser and heavier, and like I said, when you put them in a slingshot and hurl them at great speed. Yeah, it's going to do serious damage.
I heard an old preacher once talking about why he chose 5 stones, and his thinking was that if he had brothers, he wasn't thinking about missing. He said, if he has brothers, I'm ready. That was always kind of.
Yeah, so we can read on here, I guess.
43 is really the powerful, 43 through 49.
So meanwhile, so again, he's confronting him, and he says to David, Goliath says, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And like I said, plural, sticks. And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." That's some serious trash talk there, right? Yeah. I'm going to feed you to the birds. Well, David says, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head." I'll strike you down and then cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it's not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. So as he moves closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle. He runs toward him. He's not running away.
No.
He runs toward him. And reaching into his bag, taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. And the stone, I like the description, sank into his forehead and he fell face down on the ground.
You know, if God isn't who David is describing here, he's in trouble. But because he's going against, as you know, as we read a moment ago, a champion. And while he may have had some physical limitations in being big and all, David was relying, I don't think so much on his skill in slinging a rock as much as his God to be able to see him through this. His total, his trust and faith is in God. And he knew that God had given him the victory. And so this is a story, again, that we're very familiar with, but it was over before it even started. In David's mind, it was done. He was going down.
Oh, he went down. And
I love the way you said that David wasn't in it for riches. He wasn't in it for, you know, the hand of a woman. He wasn't in it for taxes. He was in it to defend the Lord, the name of God. And he did it. He followed through.
And once he hits the ground, you know, because David doesn't have a sword, but David seizes Goliath's sword and then cuts off his head. And then takes it back with him to display it.
That's right. Well, anytime you read stories like this, you know, you want to think about the application. And there's a lot of things that we talked about that we can take away. Some of the takeaways. One that came to my mind was just refusing to be discouraged by your friends. As soon as you and I try to do something for God, launch out in faith, just go ahead and expect those who are closest to you to throw a wet blanket on your dreams. Just expect that. This happens every time someone tries to do something for God, and you can just think back at the time when you tried to do something for the Lord, but just know that that's to be expected, and there are going to be those who are going to try to talk you out of it. Stay the course.
Right.
You have a takeaway? Another takeaway?
Yeah, that is a good takeaway. The fact that a lot of times, you know, that it is important to know yourself, and it's important that, and of course that through Jesus, how we know ourselves, and what Jesus makes us aware of. And a lot of times, you know, you can, what seems to be a strength can indeed be a weakness. And you look at Goliath and what seemed to be, I mean, how formidable he seemed to be, but that's great strength. Turned out to be his weakness because David was more agile. And, you know, David, a lot of times, sometimes it's all about, it's as much about tactics as it is technology.
Yeah.
And, you know, Goliath was expecting someone in hand-to-hand combat with armor and the swords, and that wasn't going to work here.
And he opened his mouth over and over again for 40 days and being very boastful.
It's some serious trash talk.
Pride comes before the fall, you know, and you just keep on running your mouth and see what happens, you know.
And there's a humility about David. I mean, you know, David does, you know, get in trouble, you know, but David, there's a humility about David. Again, he's not about the riches. He's not about, you know, marrying into, you know, to the royal family there. He's not about, you know, not paying taxes the rest of his life. He's about God. And he's, you know, been described, of course, as someone whose heart was after God.
A man after
sought God.
Yeah. His focus is on God. I think he also, another takeaway might be reflect on your victories, your previous victories. Like, I don't think David went into it. And you're talking about, being this young sheep herder, but a lion and a bear.
Hmm.
God, God helped him to defend his flock from a lion and a bear. That's a pretty good resume. And so
Yeah.
God had been with him in his past, and so he looks at Goliath of Gath, and he says, "Nah, he's no problem." It's like God has this. Someone said, if you don't have a test, you can't have a testimony. And I think that's important to note that all of us are going to have a giant in front of us. There's going to be a giant of a problem, and just know this right here, that we're to run to our problems and not away from them. And that's another
Hmm.
example of another takeaway might be David is an example of running to. Of course, he's running along with the God of the universe, but
Right.
he is facing his problems head on, and that's a good example for us all, not running away.
And you were talking about that, and about David describing the fact that how he defended those sheep, lions and bears. He's defending God's honor here. He's defending God. He's defending the armies of God. He's defending God's honor.
I think this is bigger than just two armies that are fighting here.
Right.
This is between good and evil, and David's fighting for more than just Israel,
The true God. The true God.
true God. And if we're going to pick up and fight, let's be sure that another point that could be made about Saul is be careful who you follow as a leader.
Absolutely.
And Saul is someone that it was the Israelites that wanted a king. It wasn't God's idea; it was their idea, and God relented and gave in and to what they wanted, and now they have Saul, who turns out to be a bad king.
Kind of a paper tiger. I mean, when chips are down, and here he is, and he's in the valley here, and he's and this man is taunting him for 40 days, and he abdicates his responsibility. He doesn't step up. He's trying to get somebody else to step up.
Yeah. So, hey, really good story. 1 Samuel 17. What a great lessons can be taken.
And we just scratched the surface. I mean, there's so much more to this story.
That's exactly right. Hey, how about verses 45 through 47? I think this is kind of the heart of what David is laying out about God. 45 through 47, and then I can lead us in a prayer.
David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin. But I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give you the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it's not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." Pretty confident.
Yes. All right. You and I are going to be, again, looking at some of the familiar Old Testament stories and try to look at them with a little bit of a twist. I know this is not what our Bible class was about tonight, but I think it's important that, we have in with a word of prayer and not ignore what's kind of going on in our country with the death of George Floyd. Many of us have seen that and have reacted strongly. As I saw that, I reacted strongly to that. And there's been a strong reaction across our country in protesting. And we actually, on Monday, had a peaceful protest here in Jasper.
Yeah, I was very proud of that peaceful protest. That really made me proud of this area and how people responded to that.
I think most of us who are watching this want to be a part of the solution and not a part of the problem, and are probably asking the question, how can I do that? How can I be a part of the solution? I think just being Christ-like in everything that you do is a large way of answering what we should be doing these days. Help us to be good listeners, and
Absolutely.
to be good, helping us to be good listeners. And I think it was Summer Bush who posted on her Facebook, "Help me to be an instrument of your peace." And I thought that was very appropriate.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Let me do just a closing prayer, Bill. Father, I thank you for my brother Bill, our time together as we have looked over 1 Samuel 17. Our prayer tonight, Lord, help us to be instruments of your peace. Help us to be good listeners as we listen to our neighbors. And there's a lot of us who are just confused about how do we go about making things better. And so lead us in love, Lord. Help us to represent you by being Christ-like in all things. This is our humble prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.